Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the August 4th meeting of the Yountville Town Council. My name's John Dunbar. I'm the Vice Mayor, sitting in for Mayor Cindy Sosserman, who is absent this evening. If I may call the roll, please.
Councilmember Dutton.
Here.
Councilmember Chilton.
Here.
Councilmember Mueller.
Here.
Vice Mayor Dunbar.
Here.
Please let the record reflect that Mayor Sosserman is excused.
Okay, and I'd also like to introduce a couple new members to our staff this evening. First, our interim Community Services Director, John DiLorenzo, over here to your left. Welcome. The plan is for John to be here for approximately 6 months and help us transition to our new community center and keep us running smoothly while we're looking for a permanent person for that position. So welcome officially, John.
Thank you.
And also Graham Wadsworth is our new permanent Public Works Director. Welcome, Graham. And just so that we can prove that we don't just have them come and listen to us all talk, we have agenda items for both of them this evening, so you'll hear from both of them. With that, if I may ask Graham if you would lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Graham. Item 4, closed session report. We have none, correct?
Correct.
Item 5, adoption of the agenda. Does anyone have any issues with the agenda?
Move for adoption.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None? Item 6, public comment. So for anything that is not on the agenda tonight, if anyone in the public would like to bring up an issue, please come forward, state your name, and speak into the microphone, please. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Carol Vendrillo, and I live at 1877 Carrigan Way in Yountville. And I'm here to bring you up to date on the issue involving the lot line adjustment that affects the land out there near Fennel Road, known as the Kelness Vintners or the Nord property. On July 30th, last Thursday, we filed a lawsuit in Superior Court of Napa County, and we're seeking a writ of mandate in order to convince the Board of Supervisors to rescind the lot line adjustment that they granted and when they denied my appeal. I just wanted to share with you some of the legal issues that we're going to be presenting to the judge so that you're familiar with them and we can get your comments on them. The first basis of the lawsuit has to do with the sequential nature of the lot line adjustment. And as you know, the California MAP Act permits adjustments of 4 or fewer parcels without complying with that statute. In this case, there was a lot line adjustment that affected 4, and then a couple months passed, and a second lot line adjustment was presented, and it adjusted another 4. And so the reason that it was done in 4 steps, 2 steps of 4, was for the purpose of evading the California MAP Act, and that is on the record before the Board of Supervisors that they did it that way because they wanted to evade that law. The other issue that we're going to argue to the judge is that by dividing that property up into 6 parcels, it runs in the face of the ag preserve. And you know that on the valley floor, the minimum is 40 acres. And by dividing this up, it totally defeats that measure that's been on the books for a long time, that 60% of the voters in Napa County have endorsed through Props P and J, and it's contrary to what the citizens of Napa County want. And so that will be our second argument. The other issue that we're going to argue before the judge is the county's reliance on the certificates of compliance that go back to the 1926 map. And we've all heard a lot about the 1926 map. There's a Court of Appeal decision involving this Solano County. It's called Abernathy v. Solano County. It's the Court of Appeal in our district, and that case says that you cannot rely on a map that's older than 1928. So the certificates of compliance that were issued in this case are invalid and unlawful. And it's only on that basis, the only reason that you can get a lot line adjustment is because you have these certificates of compliance. So we're going to convince the judge that the whole house of cards falls once those certificates of compliance are displayed as being unlawful. We're also going to argue that this is a matter for CEQA, and that the Board of Supervisors has repeatedly said that CEQA doesn't apply because granting a lot line adjustment is a ministerial act, not a discretionary act. Well, that's simply not the case. If you read the code, there's 12 different steps that the board has to take in order to determine whether there's going to be a lot line adjustment. It's not a ministerial act. And what does that mean if there's no CEQA compliance? That there's no environmental impact report. So we don't know what the impact is going to be of building houses in the floodplain. What about the septic tank? How are the fire department going to get there? What's travel going to do? By saying that CEQA doesn't apply, we don't know the answers to those questions, and we don't think that that's right. And finally, there's other provisions of NAPA's own general plan set out in Title 18 that the lot line adjustment is disregarding. For example, just one is the minimum 40 feet of frontage on a public right-of-way. None of those lots, well, I won't say none, but 4 out of 6 do not. So that's another issue that we want to bring up. So I'm here to explain to you what we're up to. We have had a lot of support from people in Yountville. We have an organization called the Friends of Yountville Ag Land, FOIL, and we would like to elicit your support. We have gotten signatures from over 450 people in a matter of 12 hours from far and wide, from people as far away as Australia, who said, "You mean they're going to change that beautiful vineyard into a housing development? Say it isn't so." I want to make another point. This is not about Will Nord. People come up to me and say, "You know, Will Nord's a really nice guy." I have shaken his hand at the pig barbecue out there. He seems like a really nice guy to me. I'll take him out to lunch as long as it's not at the French Laundry. It's not about Will Nord. It's about the future of the Napa Valley and the future of the agriculture land that surrounds us but might not surround us for very long. So this is what I want from you. Yountville should take the lead in this case. We have the most to lose and the most to win by getting involved. The mission statement that I just read says that the council is to provide leadership. Well, we want your leadership. We want you to participate in this effort because it affects all of us who live in Yountville. We want you to come to the court hearing, and we want you to either individually or as our representatives in our town go to the Wells Fargo Bank at the corner of Washington and Oak Circle and make a contribution. We have an account set up there. We invite your contributions. We have had several contributions from people who are very generous. But this lawsuit is going to cost some amount of money, and we could use your support, financial and otherwise. So I would like you to consider this, and if necessary, put this on the agenda for the next meeting so that you can take it up. I understand the rules are that because it's just being brought here as a public matter that you can't vote on it or rule on it, and certainly one would like the mayor to be here to participate in this most important issue. I don't have anything else to say.
Thank you. And did you say you have a hearing date and time already established or not yet?
No, we submitted the pleadings last Thursday. The next step is to set up a briefing schedule, and then there'll be oral argument, and then the judge gets to decide.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you very much for your statement. Are there any other items from the public that are not on the agenda tonight? Yes. Please speak into the microphone and state your name first. Thank you.
My name is Carla Reif. That's R-E-Y-F-F, 2 F's as in 2 Franks, and I live at 11 Forester Lane. I am here to just briefly talk to you about the swimming pool. I just found out tonight that you had seen a copy of the letter I had sent to Steve Rogers. I've been swimming up there or going up there almost every day at the senior swim time, and I wanted to tell you how lovely it is, what a wonderful asset it is to community, what wonderful people you have working up there. They're so kind to us. They're so kind and courteous and thoughtful to the veterans. You couldn't have a better staff, and I wanted to bring that to your attention. and to thank you for giving us this wonderful pool, and hopefully to try to keep it open another month when the weather gets really hot. Thank you.
Thank you. I think John is here to take full credit for that.
I'll pass along your comments to my staff. They'll be very glad to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments this evening? Seeing none, let's move on to item 7, approval of the consent calendar. Does council have any concerns, comments about the consent calendar? If not, may I hear a motion?
I move to approve our consent calendar.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None? Moving on to item 8, and before item 8, if I could just remind the public that anyone that's new to the town council hearings, we do have copies of all the agenda items on the wall to your right if you would like to follow along and haven't already done so. Also, just in advance of our item on the capital improvement program, I don't want to forget to state we do have a copy of that plan, a single copy right here on the staff table if anyone needs to look specifically at that during our presentation. But before we get there, back to item 8, presentation, the status report on the Midtown Improvement Project.
Thanks. Good evening, Vice Mayor, council members. This is a presentation on Midtown Improvement Project, which is a project that combines a variety of improvements. It's a carryover project from last year. And as what it is it's a project that runs on the west side of Washington Street from Humboldt Street down to basically the Point area just to the south of the V Marketplace driveway. And it combines projects that were a Washington Street storm drain project, accessibility improvements, traffic calming, bus stop, and as an alternate streetlight replacement along that area. And the project's goal is, number one, is to replace sidewalk and ramps in there that don't meet ADA requirements currently and replace those with ramps that meet accessibility requirements. And then also to replace a storm drain that was temporarily fixed that broke right in front of Pacific Blues, and to make a permanent fix on that. And so we're doing that work. And then in addition to that is there's a bus stop just south of the Vintage Inn driveway that we're going to replace and bring that up to the current town standards for a bus stop, including the accessibility standards, and also incorporate the street lights as a bid option, which would be replacing the existing street lights, which I understand have a problem with some of the conduit or the conductor running through the street there, and replace the 8 street lights in that area with the new town standard street lights. So, and the project, we're looking at putting it out to bid within the next couple of weeks. We have a very tight construction window. We've been working with representatives from V Marketplace, Pacific Blues, and Vintage Inn to get it basically in a time frame that'll work for them. And so what we're looking at is the latter part of October to right before Thanksgiving, so we have the work complete before Festival of Lights, and obviously that's a key area right there during Festival of Lights. So that's why we have a fairly tight time frame there, or at least to get the project to a position where it's not a problem during Festival of Lights. We use the funding from the different various projects there. It's $210,000 estimated funding. That doesn't include the the street light alternative, so we'll see how that comes in. And I think that'll be good because we'll then get a good read for how much street light replacement is going to take. As in the CIP, you'll see a little later on, has a big program for the next 2 years, is upgrading our street lights throughout town. Also part of the project at the very southern end, we're going to be changing the driveway that goes into the Whistle Stop area where the Coffee Caboose is, and the Coffee Caboose and made a contribution for that driveway change as part of their project. And it's a change that we tried to make earlier but didn't work out timing-wise when we were doing the community center project, the town center project, and that is to align that driveway with the intersection with Yon Street there. So we're incorporating all these different projects into one project that hopefully will kind of spruce up what's been dubbed Midtown. So with that, I'd like to answer any questions people might have.
Thanks, Paul. And before I ask the council for questions, I just wanted to make one general comment or question to you, and this is really, we're not adding new projects, we're combining them administratively, basically, is what you're telling us for scheduling and kind of management oversight.
Right, and they all kind of affect one another. You know, you start digging into a project, and that's something we've done quite often. We normally, when we'll go out and possibly like our overlay projects and our slurry seal projects, we'll put them together. Our street tree, curb gutter and sidewalk replacement, and our accessibility ones, we'll put those together because it's the same type of work, but we have different pots of money, and if they turn out to be in the same locations, we'll put them together and put it all, package it together as a bid. We've done it. We do it about every year where we take 2 or 3 projects and put them together as one project. The bike lanes and the overlay this last year was a good example. This one just turned out to be kind of a cornucopia of projects with like 6 different things that just kept popping up, and we said, okay, they were actually in last year's budget, and when they all came together, we said, you know, we need to put it in one project, and really as it affects V Marketplace and Vintage Inn with their driveways and getting in and out, it's really important that we don't close both their driveways at the same time with the storm drain going through it, and then a new concrete driveway in front of Vintage Inn. So that's why we kind of put it all together and packaged it this way. So you're right, it's not new funding, it's actually rollover from last year.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions of council? I know this is a non-action item, but any questions of staff? Councilmember Chilton?
I do. Well, these areas that are affected in terms of the curbs, I think there's sidewalk replacement there as well. Is this town-owned property, private property? Who's responsible for maintaining?
You know, it kind of wanders in and out through that area, the right-of-way does. And so that's, you can actually see the right-of-way. Do you have a pointer?
Good job.
This one right here.
That moves around. Yeah.
So you can see,
has a remote mouse. He can
right
use that.
here, this is where the property line is, right here, right through here, and it goes in and out more up in that direction than here. This is Vintage, that's the town up there, and so it does wander in and out through that area. It's the old state right-of-way that we inherited when they moved the highway out just west of town. So parts are private and parts are public. And we're not replacing the sidewalk along the entire area. We're just going after the sidewalk right at their driveway approach, because that's the accessibility issues that we need to keep up on and take care of. So we're basically just doing the sidewalk right there at Vintage, at the Vintage Inn entrance. And that's because it's related to how it relates to the street and the crossing and the bus stop.
Okay. My question, well, I think I'd have a follow-up question for Steve if he was here, which has to do with the fact that, question about whether there's any attempt to, we call them contributions, but from the people who actually own the property. Because we're talking about the new wine tasting room and the coffee caboose all chipped in, shall we call it, $10,000. But these property owners don't seem to be, so I don't understand the
Right, and
inconsistency
well, what
there.
we talked about with their representatives, and it's nothing formal, was their replacement. They're interested in putting some type of fencing or planting between the sidewalk and the curb to keep people from parking and walking across the street, using their parking lot as the town parking lot. I know that issue's come up quite a few times before. So at that point, they would be putting in new sidewalk for, along their frontage there, okay, which they agreed to do, but we don't have any agreement at that point.
Okay.
So we're basically going for the street work, that the sidewalk work, other than at the ramps, would be their work.
So my second question has to do with timing. We're talking about avoiding the Festival of Lights. My concern is that this says mid-October, the latter part of October. Is that mid-October or October 15th or 20th or something like that?
Yeah, the project would be awarded on the 6th, so it would probably be 6th of October, so it would probably, I would say, be like the 20th.
Okay, because my concern is that if you did the graph on economic activity and tourist activity in Yountville, it's a line that goes up every month until Halloween. And so this is practically the most busy time in Yountville. November certainly is not.
Yeah.
So I agree with the Festival of Lights, but I would question, and I don't know how disruptive this will be. This is, I'm sure, not as disruptive as replacing the water main. But the question is, how disruptive will this be? Because the timing on that, at least half of it, doesn't seem that good.
Yeah, when we talked to Vintage, the Vintage Inn people, they said they felt that was towards the end of October is where it really drops off for them. So that worked well for them. And one of the big concerns was the noise. It's going to be out there, and in order to get it in that type time frame, they're going to be working full hours.
Right.
And so they said at that time of the year they could put people in the back of the inn so they didn't have people in the rooms right up front, which is I think really helpful, because you could have people out there at 7:30 in the morning with a jackhammer taking stuff out. So
Okay.
I don't think that'd make the tourists very happy.
Well, good. I think the positive thing there is that you guys have obviously coordinated a lot with them, so
Yeah.
that's good.
Yeah, so it's a,
Thank you.
it's the last part of our really good weather. Hopefully we'll have really good weather, and so they'll be able to do it. Once we get after that, we can't squeeze it in between Thanksgiving and Christmas, and then in middle of winter it could get pretty dicey there, especially with drainage work.
Councilmember Mueller? No questions? Councilmember Dutton? Thank you very much for the presentation. Item 9, Heritage Oak Tree Ad Hoc Subcommittee Recommendation. And my understanding is we'll move into this item, and Bob Tiernan, I believe, will be handling the item, as this is really formalizing the previous council action. Go ahead, Bob.
In the packet is a resolution that reflects the accepted measures the council, after their discussion on the 21st meeting, came up with by a 3-2 vote. And it includes the tree being maintained under the direction of the town arborist, significant pruning of the tree, followed by an annual inspection and other maintenance and pruning as recommended by the arborist. Annual maintenance inspection program for the tree, and it also includes the pathway remaining closed to the public in the proximity of the tree, and that the council may review the decision if there's a change in the condition of the tree which would warrant its removal in the future. So it's a fairly straightforward resolution that reaffirms the council's direction at last meeting.
And the primary change here from what we voted on was solidifying the security of the area with the fencing. That's kind of the main difference from the other night.
Yes, because
Because it's kind of a question, but it's also a statement, I think, that that was council's request, and since there was that variable left out there, we wanted to bring this back forward for a more formal action once the whole package was kind of put together.
correct.
Thank you. Does the council have any questions of staff? Councilmember Chilton.
Thank you for bringing up my first question. I read the resolution, and I don't see anything in there that discusses the item that I was particularly concerned about, which has to do with the fencing, which I think the temporary fencing, about coming back to council with a permanent solution to make sure that what's up there is nice now, but it is clearly not a permanent solution. So that's my concern, is that there's nothing in the resolution, unless I'm reading this incorrectly, that refers to that.
You're correct. And that can be amended to add a sixth condition to return to the council with the fencing for approval.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I have one more question. I don't want to get too technical on this, but recital number C, and I was reading through some old documents here, refers to this tree as the oldest in Napa Valley. And I kind of feel like this has become a big tree story. It's like a fish story where this was a 250 to 300-year-old tree, and now it's the largest tree in Napa Valley, period. And I've had some people who say to me, how could you cut down the oldest tree in Napa Valley? And I maybe the council can consider this. I look at that and say, I don't think we have any basis of fact to make that statement. So I think the council should consider taking that out. I think, Bob, I guess the reason I bring this up now is Pramac's report, if I remember, said he believed it was between 250 and 300 years old and was probably one of the oldest in the valley. Does that sound right?
Yes.
Okay.
So if I may clarify, would you be satisfied if the wording was changed to is considered one of the oldest?
Maybe one of the oldest trees in Napa Valley, yeah.
If we could make note of that potential text change. Any other questions of staff before I ask if there are any public comments? Councilmember Mueller?
It was just my understanding that staff was going to bring back a report on the fencing, and it wasn't going to be part of the resolution. So I might be confused, but that was my understanding. So maybe we just need to add in the resolution that a report will be prepared, and we can say we have to approve the report. Would that work?
Well, I think if,
Talk about this after.
no, I think I'll make a comment to that, I think it's appropriate that we add the condition of a fencing plan. The details of the fencing plan, I don't think are appropriate for the resolution, but I think, as Councilmember Chilton acknowledged then and again tonight, that was a critical element to the overall action. So I think it would be appropriate to add that item just without specifics, and then an additional report can come to the council when the exact details of the fencing plan are in place.
So
That's more of an informational piece, I think, than part of the resolution. Would that be fair to say?
I think I understand your point, which to me, it's not an informational piece that should come back for council approval. The reason I said that is last time Steve said, well, we'll have to look at it and there could be some issues with Fish and Game, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think that's going to be the case, but those safety considerations were extremely important to me in making sure this resolution should stand. So I think it should come back for council approval.
Okay,
We can discuss that
okay,
later.
right. Councilmember Dutton, did you have any comments for staff right now?
Yeah, Bob, on the very last, number 5, where it says a decision if there's a change in the condition of the tree, is that the only thing that would trigger a change, is the condition of the tree, if there's, to this decision?
Well, this indicates that the change in the condition would warrant its removal, and so if the tree were shown to be a greater hazard by some inspection, one of these maintenance inspections, then we would return to the council for a decision at that time whether to go ahead and remove it.
I guess what I was getting at is down the road, so to speak, assuming this is going to pass, which it probably will, if there was far more people that were disappointed that the path remains closed and this becomes a big major issue, they say, well, sorry, we can't do anything about it because the condition of the tree hasn't changed. So till that happens, we're not going to consider this.
That would be a different consideration related to the closure of the path and the impact it has on the community, rather than this states it's related to the condition of the tree.
But I think if that were to occur, and we wanted to do that, we would just, delete this resolution and put in a new resolution to supplant that, if that happened.
If I could just interrupt, before we get into a full-on discussion about this, we're still just asking for staff questions, and then I'd like to get comments, from the public, and then we can address the overall
Okay.
item. So, Councilmember Dutton, did you have sufficient clarity there, or did you have any other questions?
No, I understand. You're really saying as the resolution stands, it's only a condition of the tree with this resolution that would change the decision or bring it up for another.
And At the pleasure of the council, they could amend the condition to reflect and broaden the condition.
Okay.
I would suggest that we keep that item open until after we hear comment, and then we can decide if we want to, as we did with the fencing portion, we may want to amend or add or subtract elements to this resolution or the recitals. Did you?
Well, to follow up on Councilmember Dutton's question, maybe this is for you, Amy. I don't see anything in here. I don't know that we even could. We can't preclude a future council for saying, well, sorry, you can't consider that. They could just strike all this out and say cut it down.
Right,
Fine, thank you.
right. You could rescind this resolution for any reason that isn't necessarily stated in the resolution itself.
Any other questions of staff right now? No? I will welcome comments from the public. If anyone would like to comment on this item, it's not technically a public hearing, but we always welcome your comments. Billy, please.
My name is Billy Hewitt, and I think all of you have in your package an email that I sent. I have a question about that was just brought up. Are you going to block the path permanently so no one can see the tree anyway? And we pride ourselves in being a walking town, and now we're blocking off one of the greatest walking paths that we have in town that's accessible to everybody. And I'm thinking particularly of the people over at Vintage, at the Seventh-day Adventist Estates. You know, they walk a little ways and then they get, then they have to stop and go back the same way. They're used to using that path. I haven't come forward in favor or against the tree. I love the tree and I agree it's beautiful. However, in light of how many fallen trees and branches we have had, even since you approved saving this tree, I think it's very significant. There was a big tree that fell in my neighborhood, just a big branch, and luckily it didn't hit a house or knock down a fence or anybody. And it was very nice that the town sent staff out to clean it up when it really was a homeowner's responsibility. In Marin County, a woman had to be helicoptered out from a branch of an oak tree that fell on her in a hiking path. No warning, no wind, the trees get dry and fall. Now, Mr. Premick, who is the arborist, said that this tree was vital but not structurally sound. I believe that's what his report said. So I think, if at all possible, perhaps you ought to reconsider. And has there been a price tag set on this? Like Councilman Dunton just asked, is the health of the tree the only thing that will cause it to come down? I mean, are you saying we will spend $500,000 to save this tree? Will you spend $100,000 to save this tree? I think it's probably not budgeted, so it's going to be an added expense. And I think perhaps emotion is ruling instead of some of the fiscally sound ideas that we're famous for and we need to continue in this day and age. Thank you very much. Did I say my name, Billy Hewitt?
Yes, you did.
9 Landy Way.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Rife.
Good evening. My name is Carla Rife, and I live at 11 Forester Lane. I think you can spell my name by now. I did not come forward on this issue before because I really try to keep my interests focused on two things, the library and the swimming pool. And so I thought, well, let the tree lovers come forward and discuss this issue. However, I was riding down Highway 29 about 10 minutes before that tree fell. And I was riding back on 29 and saw it there and saw the police directing the traffic away. And I guess it was Caltrans who was sawing the logs off. And it really scared me. And I thought, oh, this is what the whole tree issue is about. And in fact, I had to take down a tree in front of my house because it started to lean towards my house, and enough people told me, you better get rid of that tree or it's going to fall on your roof, and you're da-da-da. So I would come forward at this time to, since that other tree fell, to say something. And I'm sorry I was not able to come to the meeting because other extenuating circumstances didn't allow that to happen. So other than that, the fact of that other tree scaring me and the fact that my husband, who is a semi-invalid, used that path every day. I think, but for the last year, I think it's been closed. So you go up to where the gate is or the wire fence is and turn around and walk away. That path is no longer accessible to the walking public in Yountville. So I guess if the tree were gone or cut back or something, it would be. But what's the use of having the path, have people looking at the tree if you don't have access to it? Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just respond also to the initial comments. Costs were not specified for either action, whether we decided to bring the tree down, the cost of cutting it down, and the mitigations that the Department of Fish and Game were requiring, which was something like 40 saplings, and I'm not sure what the other conditions were. We didn't price that out, nor did we itemize the potential pruning and maintenance, but I think the town manager did state that none of this is basically budgeted. So we would need to be finding the funding somewhere in the budget. Are there other comments from the public? Yes, Mr. Brinkman?
Tim Bringman. A couple days ago, I walked up to the area of the tree, and there's already been a significant fence installed. And from my point of view, I don't see any way, this is in the south end, that you could walk around that tree or get to the creek or anything. So I think that problem has already been taken care of. If Steve Rogers is here, he may be able to tell you about it. But anyway, I just want to let you know.
Thank you. And not to speak for Councilmember Chilton, I think his primary concern wasn't the fencing along either end of the pathway. Your primary concern was the access to and from the elementary school, which is a different area, but, okay. And then some of the fencing has already been reinforced since the last time we met. Are there any other comments from the public? Seeing none, I'll invite council comments once again. Councilmember Chilton? Do you have any additional comments or?
Well, just a couple of comments. A couple of things I've heard. I've heard a lot of commentary since 2 weeks ago. One is no doubt that there is a significant amount of citizens of town who are concerned about the closure of the path. I've heard a lot more about it since 2 weeks ago than I did prior to that, even though the path's been closed for, I think, 5 months now, 6 months at this point. So one of my reactions is the path going to be blocked permanently? Well, I guess the answer is yes and no. It's permanently as long as that tree is there, and then when the tree's gone, it's not. So you know, that's on your perspective. That tree lasts for 30 years. It's going to feel permanent to all of us. The price tag, I know early on, before even submitted an application to Fish and Game, which was approved to remove the tree. Simple removal, which is not simple, of that tree, was, I believe, it was quoted in the $25,000 to $30,000 range. That's off memory. That was before even the issue of can we save the significant amount of bee colonies that are in that tree. I think there are 7 bee colonies, so that would be an additional cost. I think that's one thing that needs to be pointed out is there is no-cost solution here. The pruning of the tree will not cost as much as the removal of the tree, at least not in the short term. Over the long term, I think it's certainly, the cost could be the same, if not more, to preserve it. So I think we should look at it and from that perspective. I did go out, I believe it's what Mr. Brinkman was referring to, the very end of the path where it stops behind the elementary school. There has been fencing put up in that gap. That was my primary concern. The fencing certainly looks a lot better than orange construction fencing, but is not permanent fencing in the way the path will be permanently closed until it's not. So I continue to have that concern. We discussed a couple of these items in here. The one that is important to me is adding a condition, number 6, that the staff returns to council with a permanent fencing plan for council approval. And that's my only comments at this point.
Okay. Councilmember Moeller, you had a concern earlier. Did you want to readdress that issue now?
No, I was just addressing that, well, I guess it's part of the comments I had too. My perception of this is that this represents a decision that we made over a long period of time, and it really wasn't just emotion, and it really wasn't cost. It was very multifactorial in terms of liability, safety. There certainly was emotion. There was certainly discussion about the significance of the tree. It was a whole laundry list of things that were really kind of factored in. And to me, the key part of this is that we will be looking at the condition of this tree periodically. We've stated that time frame that we're going to be doing. And so this, in a way, is a dynamic resolution that we will be monitoring over time. So even though you might want to say something's permanent, I think that it's something that is not going to go away when that tree is there, and we're going to be looking at it annually. And so I think it's going to be an ongoing discussion, and I think, you know, as we go year to year or even interim, talking about, you know, did we make the right decision? Do we want to keep it up? What about the path? I think, you know, we'll keep talking about all those things as we move forward. But as it stands right now, I'm fine with adding the additional wording in C. And I do have a question. If the staff returns to council for, with a report regarding permanent fencing, then that will be subject to additional approval at that time. Is that what we want to suggest to put in here?
Thank you. Any other comments? Councilmember Mueller?
That was it.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Dutton?
Thank you. Yeah, I too took a look at that area this past week, and the fencing. It's interesting, and I'm sure those of you who have been along there's some parts, and I guess it's because growth up that's grown up from the creek where the fence is no more than, I'd say, 2.5 feet high. Certainly no barrier for any fifth, sixth grader if they want to get into there. I think we all have to be realistic. If a kid wants to get in that creek, he's going to get in there one way or another. I'm certainly, the fencing is a deterrent to a point. If something does happen, you know, just hopefully nobody is there when it does. I did want to address a couple of the issues that I had talked about, only, again was the financial thing, and my comments earlier was basically we were going in with a no cost, what it's going to cost us, so to speak, or no amount, and how long. I do understand, as Councilman Chilton said, $25,000 to $30,000 to remove it. That's acceptable. I might point out that is a one-time expense. Okay, so whether that, when the tree fails, we're still going to have that expense. It's just not going to disappear. The ongoing expense for the arborist, we haven't even factored the town's time in here. I'm just concerned, you know, how we can do that. I mean, we preach fiscal responsibility on one hand, and the other, something like this happens. So that remains to be seen. I hope we can keep a separate accounting of those. I notice they are going to move that particular CP item into another department. Hopefully it just doesn't disappear into the black hole, and we are able to keep track of what the expenses are on that. Other than that, yeah, number thing about the path is this is day 244 that's been closed. December 3rd was when the barriers went up originally. So it's been well over half a year, and who knows how long. So that's all I have to say. It's unfortunate, and I know things aren't going to change, but that's my say.
Thank you for your comments. And I hesitate to re-argue this entire issue. What I will say is I support the changes to the wording of the recital in the resolution to include more explicitly the fencing plan. And I would also suggest that we, even though it's implied in item 5 about the changing in the condition of the tree itself, if we added something like the condition of the tree and all related conditions, because there are circumstances that we're going to be continuing to monitor other than specifically the health of the tree. So with those adjustments to the wording of this resolution, is there a motion to formalize our action?
Can I make one statement for you?
Yes.
First of all, I support the changes that you just outlined. I want to make a comment about what Councilmember Dutton just said, because I think he's correct. Well, he's correct on two things. One has to do with the financial issue, which we've talked about. The second one has to do with when it really comes down to it, and I said this in the last meeting at length, and this is how we got in the fence discussion. Safety is absolutely, to me, the number one concern. That is why the path is closed. That's why it has to remain closed until something substantial changes, which is probably the tree is no longer there. But I do believe that we have to be cognizant of, and I go back to people's statements of letting the tree go through its natural cycle. I don't believe, that is not my motivation. My motivation is, can we save the tree in a reasonable way? And if we go back there, because Councilmember Dutton's right, if you go back behind the elementary school, it's not a high fence to jump over. And if we see that, you know what, the new fence is not working and people are still going around it, I think that is another condition that this council should look at. The good news is the likelihood, which I think now is extraordinarily small, of the situations we've seen in Sonoma County with the eucalyptus tree, Marin County, of people randomly walking on a path or a road and having a collapse, the likelihood of anybody being on there is much, much, much smaller than it was before. And it's small enough that I think that the risk, which to me is very small, is probably worthwhile. And if that does not prove out, then my decision would absolutely change.
I agree, and I think the entire council agrees that there are several thresholds that we're going to be monitoring here. And that's why I wanted to make sure that it was more explicit in the conditions, that it wasn't just the condition of the tree. And to your point, Councilmember Chilton, many of and you pointed out several public instances of collapsing trees and limbs, and we heard it again tonight, but in none of those cases, to my knowledge, were those in cordoned off prohibited areas. That was a natural course of public activity, which is exactly why we closed the path in the first place. So we've taken some mitigation measures to minimize the potential of anything like that happening. We're continuing to mitigate with pruning, and it's regular monitoring. I think we've made that quite clear. So anyway, with those additional comments, is there a motion for the council to consider?
I move that to approve resolution number 2810-09 with the following changes. In recital item C, we add one of after 2B. And we add, we modify item 5 to address and all other related conditions. And we add item 6, that staff will return to council with a final fencing plan, and that plan will be approved by council.
I'll second.
But before we vote on this, Town Clerk, do you need the full resolution title to be read into the record?
I think it's fine that you've read the number.
Okay.
Changes.
With that, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
And I'd like to just state for the record that Mayor Sossman did vote against this at the previous council meeting.
She'll be reflected as absent with this vote.
Thank you. So that resolution does pass.
Yes, it does.
Thank you. So we will now move on to item 10, Capital Improvement Program. Considering the adoption of Resolution 2811-09, approving the town's 5-year capital improvement program for fiscal years 2009-10 through 2013-14.
Thanks. The 5-year capital improvement program, known as the CIP, is a program that we use to identify projects and funding sources needed to deliver those projects, and it's a long-term planning tool that we use. This is the 14th CIP that we've done since its inception in 1996. This year's program includes 44 projects over the 5-year term. $9.76 million is the total. The projects within those 44, there are a lot of projects that are ongoing projects, such as accessibility program, town beautification, tree and sidewalk replacement program, and slurry seals and overlay programs. Probably the big difference this year is that actually in the last 2 years we've kind of retooled the document so it looks a lot different and incorporates a lot more information than it has in its previous incarnation. And this year the big change is really reduction in a lot of programs to very basic levels. Programs like the accessibility improvement program, beautification, tree and sidewalk, those programs have been reduced to less than half the levels that they were before. Many of them were $75,000 last year, cut to $50,000, and now they're down to $20,000. And with many of the other projects, projects have been reduced or deferred due to the current economic situations and what was some fairly uncertain state funding considerations. The accessibility, beautification, and tree and sidewalk program that have been cut back. One of the things is the Midtown project that we just heard of a little while ago this evening. That includes a lot of that work, so that's where a lot of that's going on. And then we've included a minimal projects or programmed minimal amounts of money in those programs to address things that come up during the year. This year's program has 3 fairly big ticket items. The first is treatment plant Title 22 upgrades for this wastewater treatment plant, and that's a $1.2 million project, and it includes effluent diffuser out at the river and working towards zero discharge for the wastewater treatment plant. It includes a lot more recycling of water and such things. We're always under pressure from the state to improve those requirements. Of course, along with doing that, a lot more recycled water hopefully will, if we can use it in irrigation, will also reduce the amount of treated water that we have to use. There's also the Highway 29 bike project, and that's a project, $750,000 project that runs along the Highway 29 right-of-way from California Drive to Madison Street. That's a federally funded project, and it's actually in the Caltrans right-of-way, so that's a big upcoming project. And then utility undergrounding program, and that's a program that has been increased this year. It's the budget on that is $460,000. We actually have 2 projects that we're looking at. We're not entirely sure if we're going to be able to fund those entirely this year, but one of them is the North Washington work up between Starkey and Madison Street, and that's in conjunction with work that's going on at Hotel Luca. And there's also another project, Vita, next to it. And so trying to tag on to that project and get some additional undergrounding in that whole area from Starkey Street up to Madison Street. And then the other project is a continuation of the undergrounding that was done with Bartizono, and that's the area coming down right in front of Town Hall right here from Fennell Road to Weber Street. And so those are the 2 projects that are coming in, and we're looking up to set up a meeting to go over those with PG&E and the underground consultant in the next coming weeks to see how we can most effectively address those 2 areas. Both those also include replacement of existing streetlights with the new town standards. So in the appropriations for this, everything that's in the current fiscal year, I think there are 22 projects, which are $3.8 million. Those all are the same as what was in the adopted budget. And as mentioned before, the whole program's 44 projects over $9.7 million for the full 5 years. So with that, the recommendation is to adopt the resolution for the 5-year program. Thanks.
Thank you. And I'd also like to restate that we do have a copy that, first of all, there are some revised pages that have some basically clerical adjustments to them to correct a couple number errors. That binder there has the corrected pages in it. There's also a copy online for anyone that would like to review the entire program. And we're not just so the public is aware, we're not talking about approving funding for all the projects over the course of the 5 years, but we're approving the plan for the schedule and those items.
Right. The only ones approved are those in the budget for the first year. The remaining 4 years are basically a planning tool.
Thank you. Are there any questions of staff at this point? Councilmember Mueller, if you would start.
It's just an administrative one. We're supposed to have a resolution with whereases and things like that in it?
I don't see the resolution in the packet.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's not good.
There is a resolution number to approve the plan. There is not an actual statement of that resolution.
Yeah, I'd like to see the resolution before I approve it. All the with all the whereases and the recitals.
Let me check somewhere else and see if I can pull something up. Maybe there's not. And just a minute.
Well, you do need to have the resolution before
yes.
you adopt.
I'm making a congressional joke.
So if we could table the action on this item, or are you,
Wait, let me see
you're
if I
able
can
to
find
potentially
it.
get something right away?
Potentially.
Didn't want to put that time pressure on you. If there are additional questions, Councilmember Chilton's going to help us fill time.
Paul, I'll let you fill some time here. On your staff report, it talks about utility undergrounding, and it talks about Yount to Fennell to Weber and Washington, Starkey to Madison. There's that big or. How does that or get resolved?
Yeah, that's we're trying to find out if we actually can stretch the money. Right, the one nice thing right now is the bidding climate is very good,
Yeah.
but we have a pretty good information on the project that's right out in front here. We've been working on that for actually a couple of years, the one on Yount Street, and so we have some plans for that. And so we have a pretty good idea of the funding on that, and it's probably going to be around $380,000. That's kind of the estimate on that. So that leaves about $100,000. What we don't have is plans yet on the work that's up there related to Hotel Luca. Hotel Luca will be doing the undergrounding across their project, but we're looking at expanding that to go down in front of the Maisonnerie and Vida participation in that, and also try to go across the street to pick up some of the stuff in front of Poncha's and Gordon's site there. And so we might not be able to have enough money to do both of those.
So people will see Yount Street will happen. It's the question of whether
Well, the other
Washington
one
will be extended.
Well, the other one is kind of, because it's being constructed right now. It actually there's certain parts of it that would make more sense to do quicker on that one because the work will actually be done. This one is more of a standalone project. So if it looks like there's a chance that one could go first because it actually is something that makes sense to because of all the work that's going on adjacent to it.
Probably the topic of a future staff report.
Yeah, yeah. So we'll be working out those details. Or also we're going to go back and investigate. There's what they call Rule 20A money from PG&E to do work. The problem is it takes a while to get that, and when we originally went to use it on this area right here, they said it would be 3 or 4 years out. Well, it's already 3 years later. So at that time, it wasn't pursued. But if we can go back and look at getting that money to use on this project, we couldn't use it on the other project because it's not long enough. There are certain rules about it. Then it would make sense to say, hey, maybe we put off the Yount Street one, go after that money that's basically in a bank that we get to use, and do the one up on Washington, and then next year really work hard on getting the Yount Street one done.
Okay. One other quick question. I'm looking at the section in the CIP regarding resurfacing. And I remember when Napa recently had the situation where they've taken some of their repaving in-house, and they were all excited about it, but they were not going to repave the worst roads because they had to actually go through and dig out the road and replace it entirely. Are we in that situation anywhere? Because I look at Yount Street, and it talks about Yount from Fennell to Hopper Creek, and then further on is waiting for an undergrounding or sewer mains, which I don't know when those are coming. I might be able to find it out in here. But are we pushing those off to the point where it's going to cost them more money because we're going to have to rip the entire street up, not just resurface it?
There's Yon's probably in the worst shape. I would say Yon and Madison. Those are in the worst shape, and they're areas where we would do what we call dig outs, where they're really rutted and broken up, and we dig out those sections. I doubt we would remove the entire street, but yeah, you do get to that point where at some point it's like, yeah, you got to redo the whole thing, which was really difficult because you're going down, a foot or two, and you have to deal with utilities and a lot of dust. So we do try to avoid that. But in general, I would say Madison would probably be the toughest one. We don't have big, heavy truck traffic that a lot of other jurisdictions have, other than on the crossroads in Madison and on Washington, which isn't really a problem. But so we're in pretty good shape there. So we're actually usually able to do less paving because of our lower truck traffic and get away with only reconstructing small portions of the roads.
Other questions, Councilmember Mueller?
Back to my administrative question. I guess this is for Amy and maybe Michelle. If the public hasn't had 72 hours to review this, can we act on this evening, or have they had sufficient time?
The only thing you're required to publish 72 hours in advance is the agenda itself. So the materials that you receive, as long as they're available to the public, you can still vote on those.
Okay, thanks.
And what I'll just to follow up, if people haven't had a chance to either get a copy or read this, there aren't hidden, numbers in here. These are mostly kind of official wording. Staff has prepared a capital improvement program that's outlined major expenditures over the next 5 years. Town council is empowered under the specific government code to review that plan. Tonight, the council did receive the plan relative to the general plan, and what we would be resolved to approve is the 2010 to 2014 capital improvement program being consistent with the general plan, and that we would then in fact adopt the capital improvement program. So that's the gist of what we have right here, in case there's any question. Other comments, Councilmember Mueller?
No.
Councilmember Dutton?
No, I don't.
The only thing that I wanted to continue on is to state that the council has thoroughly reviewed the whole program. It's not that it was just presented. We reviewed it in great detail during the budget process and have made some adjustments to the original program since that conversation. So this is, again, formalizing the acceptance of that 5-year plan. Can't remember if I asked if there were any questions of the public. In case I didn't ask that, are there any questions or comments from the public? With that, I will ask if the council is ready to make an action.
I'll move for the adoption of resolution number 2811-09, adopting the town's 5-year capital improvement program for fiscal years 2010 through 2014.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None? That motion carries. Item 11 is a public hearing, the housing element townwide. Consideration of adopting Resolution 2812-09, approving an update to the housing element of the Yountville General Plan and the associated negative declaration. Can we have a staff report, please?
Thank you. The draft housing element was presented to the council at the April 21st meeting, and following that meeting, council directed staff to forward the draft to HCD for review and comment, which was done. They received the draft on April 29th, and we did receive comments back, written comments back on June 26th. Those comments in that letter is included in your packet. And just to back up a little bit and review that the, in general, depicting the direction of the housing element in this cycle is a continuation of the policies that are present in the current housing element. And this update is really reflecting the progress made on projects that were discussed in that housing element as future projects for the most part, and also responding to recent changes in state law that are new mandates that are required to be addressed in the housing element. Those were discussed at the last draft stage of the housing element at the April meeting. And that staff report, by the way, is also included in your packet for reference that discusses those programs at the state. So the comments received back from the state were responded to by the town's housing consultant, PMC. Those responses are included in the staff report in a summary form at the back. And tonight, we have Eli Harlan and Cynthia Dean Alviso from PMC have a presentation for you and will be available for questions. What is being requested tonight is an adoption of the included resolution in your packet, 281209, that will adopt the update to the housing element of the general plan and the associated negative declaration. The initial study and negative declaration were included in your packet as well. Following adoption by council, there will be a 90-day review period by HCD, and that will be for certification of our housing element. We have been in communication recently, as of this week, with HCD, and they did have some additional questions for us that we are responding to, and the housing consultants are responding to, and these are essentially questions that are clarifications rather than substantive changes to the document. And in that vein, going forward after tonight's meeting, we would request that staff be authorized to make clarifications along those lines that would be not substantial changes to the document, but responding to additional HCD questions. And also, one note of interest to the council would be the 55 or older provision for our mobile home parks that was indicated as a direction for the housing element. That is proceeding. The town attorney is preparing that document or that draft ordinance, and we would expect to meet with the owners and of the mobile home parks, residents of the mobile home parks, and ZDRB prior to bringing that to the council, and you would have the comments from those meetings. That will happen in August this month. Are there any questions for me at this point?
That's what I was about to ask. Are there any questions of staff at this point? Councilmember Moeller.
So what you just described is happening in August. That's going to be the conversations that you're going to have with the mobile home park residents and the owners.
Correct.
Okay.
And then ZDRB that'll have to happen in September conceivably.
Okay.
Councilmember Chitton, any questions? Councilmember Dutton?
No, I don't.
Then we will move forward to the public hearing portion and welcome a presentation. Please state your name, and I don't know if we need to adjust that height of that microphone or not.
That work?
Great.
Good evening. I'm Cynthia Dean Alviso. This is Eli Harlan, and we're with PMC. And we have been working over the past several months to update the housing element. We have received comments back from HCD, and we're going to present to you the revisions this evening. I will start with the requirements and the contents, and then Eli will get into the actual revisions. So the housing element is one of the 7 mandated elements. It requires existing and projected housing needs of all economic segments of the community. It is for a 5-year time frame. The state schedules periodic updates of the housing element, and it is one of the only elements that requires certification from the state. So these are the new state law requirements. There's SB2, which is the emergency shelter, transitional and supportive housing. That requires emergency shelters by right in one zone and requires transitional and supportive housing to be permitted as any other residential use within that same zone. AB 2634, existing, projected, and extremely low income need. So that existing is, we usually use a CHAS data to come up with that information, which will show us who falls into that income category. And then for the projected, we just take the very low income RHNA, and then 50% of that is the projected extremely low. AB 2348, this requires a more detailed sites analysis, so that requires APN and general plan designation, zoning, acreage. They want to see everything. It needs to be site specific, and there is a detailed map as well. For SB 375, this mainly will affect the next round of housing elements. For this round, they just want to see a time frame associated with the implementation measures. The housing element contents, it exists, there's the review of the existing policies and programs, so that's going to go over the progress of the previous element. The needs assessment is more of the demographic background. The constraints will deal with fees, processing procedures. The housing resources will be the resources available for the community, and then there's the policy portion of the document, which is the objectives, policies, and programs. So now Eli will get into the requested revisions from HCD.
Good evening, Eli Harland, and as Bob mentioned, there were a few clarifications that HCD requested us to make with that draft before we submitted it for certification. So one of those was we needed to show the tenure of the existing extremely low income population, which is those households that earn 30% or less of the median income. So we've also included an additional description to explain to HCD that there is land suitable for residential development beyond the RHNA. We don't have to show that land per se to meet the RHNA. The RHNA has been met through a majority of entitled sites, inclusionary housing agreements that have been basically executed and that we've used to show that the RHNA has been met. But HCD would like to see basically that we go above that threshold and we treat RHNA more or less not like a ceiling, but that it can keep growing. So there's a description explaining that. It's not committing the town to any further programs or rezoning of any districts. So, and there's in regards to the emergency shelters, as Cynthia mentioned, they have to be allowed by right in a particular zone, and those are each the PF and the PC zones. The program that's currently written into the housing element shows that those zones do have room to accommodate enough of an emergency shelter to meet the need of that population that would need emergency shelter, which is a low population. So. And then also, HCD requested clarification in regards to farm worker housing, and just to show that the town's ordinance is in compliance with health and safety codes 107215 and 107216, and we've included that description to further that discussion in the document. And then the analysis of the design review process, that's for the multifamily design review process. So that's discussing basically the timeline to go through the 3 stages of that through the ZDRB as well as the town council. And they also wanted to know the objective of that design review to show that there's not a constraint to building affordable housing that would typically be a multifamily housing unit. So those discussions have been included, and as Bob mentioned, we've been in contact with HCD over the last couple days and throughout this month to ensure that that those things are being updated according to what their request was, but it's not going to affect any policy. And the program additions and program clarifications that have been made. Program 13 in the housing element is the Affordable Housing Overlay Program, and we have revised that program to basically explain to HCD that the AHO sites that were designated in the previous program, those have been developed, but moving forward, any sites that are large enough and below the 5-acre limit to accommodate an affordable housing unit. As part of the application process, that AHO can be activated, that overlay can be activated to show HCD basically that there is still potential to develop affordable housing after this housing element, basically. So Program 21 is discussing the on-site options and the in-lieu fees in regards to the affordable housing developments that have been constructed, and it clarifies that the on-site option was basically the option that was taken, and there weren't in-lieu fees used to develop that affordable housing. And Program 17 and 18, just as in the first bullet on top there, 17, we clarified a timeline. We had made an administrative error, so that timeline was changed, and HCD was fine with that. And the second part is we added language to show that funding or a portion of funding will be used and prioritized towards the extremely low income housing needs. So, and the last one was to ensure that the state density bonus law was consistent with the town's density bonus law. And we added language to show that. There isn't any policy revisions that need to be made. Those basically read exactly the same. So.
Okay, this next slide shows the public participation process throughout the update. So there was the Zoning and Design Review Board on April 14th, the Town Council hearing, which was in front of you on the 21st. We had an online survey, which was available on May 18th to try to gather as much input as possible from the community. We did only receive one survey that was completed, but that is in the element. We submitted the housing element to the state for the initial 60-day review on April 27th. We received the comment letter on the 30th, and then hopefully we will adopt the housing element this evening and then resubmit for the final 90-day review process. So the CEQA review, the housing element is a policy-level document and in itself does not cause any environmental impacts, but if there are amendments made, it may warrant future environmental review. The housing element does remain consistent with the general plan land use element. So as Bob stated before, we still are working with HCD to finalize any minor revisions that may be needed. We'll probably be able to wrap that up within the next couple days because it is very minor. So at that point, that's all I have for you.
Thank you. Does council have any questions of the presenters? Councilmember Moeller?
Yes, I have a question on your very first slide. You have the numbers for how many low-income rentals and owners we have.
For extremely low.
Right.
So anyone making less than 30%, yeah.
Right. I just had a question about once we get there. Because you had actual numbers there, and I think in your report you had it listed in addition to the numbers percent, and as I recall, it was 4% and 6% respectively. So my question, there it is. So with the new housing element that we've got proposed in here, that 4% and 6% will go up, I'm just kind of guessing, by 50% or something like that. I didn't do the calculation. So is that going to be about where we need to be? I mean, we're a small town, our population's fairly static. We don't.
As far as RENA goes, is that you're comparing this number to the RENA allocation?
Yes.
I don't have the extremely low RENA directly in front of me. Do you have the housing element?
If we go up to 6% and then 8% respectively, I mean, how are we faring with other towns, and how does that? How do we evaluate that?
Well, and the 4% and the 6%, that's the percentage of owner-occupied and renter-occupied. So 6% of owner-occupied.
Okay,
are the
so it's 6
extremely
and 4, okay.
Yeah, and it's of those 10 years, not just of the total household population. So let me find Rita real fast.
It would be safe to assume that you are where you need to be.
So statewide for other cities, those are the numbers?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, that's it.
And if you're able to find the specific numbers to follow up on that, that would be great. Any questions? Councilmember Dutton, do you have any questions? The only question I had relates back to the comment that was made about HCD wanting to exceed the RENA threshold. And that doesn't sound like it makes sense, because doesn't HCD have a say in what RENA is already allocating?
Right,
to
yeah,
us?
and they basically initiate the first allocation, so, and then that allocation is given to your council of government, and you guys go through the process of divvying up those numbers. So I have the same kind of frustration and confusion with the whole thing, because you guys did a great job at building affordable housing units relative to the size of the town, which we don't see in every jurisdiction we go to and work in. So you guys did a great job. So I was really surprised to see that come back when it did, and the explanation was that RENA is not a threshold, but it should be considered more of a gauge, I guess is how they explained it. So what they want to see at this point is additional sites that could be suitable for residential development, and what we've identified is possible underutilized sites that could meet that criteria. Not saying that in 2 years this site has to be developed with a residential unit, but that there's a potential if demand if demand is greater than the original RENA allocation. So
if HCD is looking at RENA numbers as the minimum requirement, you're able to address the kind of the open-ended maximum that they're asking us to be prepared for,
right,
which we may see in future RENA allocation numbers as that schedule moves forward.
Which is where it should be. Yes, correct, in the future RENA allocation. And we with the RENA not being a lot smaller, I guess for the town, they were surprised that that was the only land available. So I think that's what set them off to ask the question: is this all that's available after this, or is there additional land that we can look forward to?
Yeah, what I would push back against is if they start to punish the communities that actually satisfy what they're saying is their requirement, and then they say, well, if you were able to do that, then clearly we can ask you for more. So
Right.
that's what I would not want to have that expectation come from the state.
Right, and that's not what the question that they're asking is not to find that out.
Okay.
So yeah, and it's 8 households through 2014 that are projected to be extremely low income. The state does not project based on tenure, so we could assume the 4% and 6% of those 8 would be the best way to estimate that future need, but it's something that has to be analyzed and then updated in the following elements. So, and then you'll be able to answer that question of the existing at that point. So,
Thanks. Got it.
Thank you. Are there any comments from the public, either questions of the presenters or general comments? Seeing no movement, I'll readdress the council for potential action. Councilmember Chilton is approaching the microphone.
Would you like me to speak?
If you have something to say.
My only thing to say is, first of all, I guess I have 2 things to say. One is, when I got this, my first question was there anything substantive really that the state came back for? And there seems like there's a lot of kind of bureaucratic hurdles here. They have to say something. But to me, it looks good that the fact there's really nothing substantive. They're not saying rezone ag land or something like that. So that's a positive reflection, I think, on what Yountville has done. I do have a concern. It's a fairly minor one on the request to give staff the authority to make changes beyond what we see here on their own. I think that you said even in the next couple of days there could be some small mop-up stuff that needs to go in there. My preference is that we approve the housing element, and if something were to change, even small, to me, it's part of our general plan, so I think that the council should always see what's in there. We have a consent item in the next council just to mop that up if necessary.
If I can, you may want to address this, either staff or you, with no other meeting called for this month, does that preclude that from even being a reasonable option to consider?
If we do have any changes, HCD is very picky about specific words, so it's not even going to be a major, we probably won't even change a full sentence. It'll be minor words here and there. We've realized that working with them in other jurisdictions that they are very picky with language, but it wouldn't be anything substantial whatsoever.
But I guess my question is there any regulatory, there's not any regulatory barrier to that? We pass this general plan, this element, and then if something needs to change, however minor, that it's just a council approval. And I again go back to the fact this is the town's general plan. It's, you know, I think, Bob, you may refer to it as the constitution of the planning part of the town. So hope the founding fathers wouldn't have taken just the small words, and we argue about those now for 250 years.
I will, since we're going to be examining changes, and I'll credit Rob Anglin for pointing this out to me. It's on page 54, not that we got to dig into the document, but there was a minor amendment about lot size discussed, that there are three, we wanted to add there's three primary districts that residential developments encouraged, and pointing out that new residential development would be in mixed residential and single-family residential. The other residential district would be Old Town. Now, Old Town's essentially built out, so we would expect those other two districts to be experiencing the new residential. It's a nuance like that that I'm talking about. We would be changing to the document. And we would add the sentence, or the addition that, and the Old Town Historic District is an established residential district that is generally built out. Just that clarification. And then the one Rob pointed out was there was a page 54 where they, in the first sentence in the RM lot size discussion, it was incorrect to say that the lot size they had in there was incorrect. What they were, somehow the second unit discussion got in there, that second units are 6,000 square feet. And it somehow got into the discussion of the RM, and we corrected that indeed the lot size for RM and single family are one and the same. And 4,000 minimum, 8,000 maximum, and Old Town is 5,000 and 8,000. So it's just a correction that's really an oversight rather than any substantial change. These are already in our zoning documents and design documents, this language. And we were just going to reflect it back, that correction, into the general plan housing element. So that's what we were after on the.
I understand.
So, Councilor Chilton, if I could ask for your clarification on your comfort level of clerical changes, or if any words are changed, do you feel like it needs to be readdressed?
I think it should be. When I go readdressed, I simply think that a resolution to do the changes, however minor, I think it's just appropriate for the council to make those, to always sign off on those, particularly when we're talking about the general plan.
Okay, Councilmember Moeller?
Based on what staff has what staff is talking about in terms of the clarification and the general comment changes, I'm fine with staff making those because, as was pointed out, we do have opportunities to amend these documents if we approve it tonight, if something significant comes up. So that would be how I would like to handle it at that time, because I believe that what is left is really pretty minor. So I'm fine with approving this tonight if we don't have any other major changes.
Councilmember Dutton?
I would agree with Council.
Sorry, your microphone, just for the record.
I would agree with Councilmember Moeller on that particular issue, as she stated.
Any other comments?
No, I don't.
Thank you. And I would agree also. I trust that the staff changes that would be made would not in any way impact the intent or the policy that's set in the housing element. That being said, I would still request that staff present council with copies of any wording changes, and if council feels like it does need to be formally addressed, then we can do so, but I would still support moving forward with the document as is with that stipulation.
Thank you. And the main thing is to initiate the 90-day review, and we can send the document off to HCD, and if it comes to pass where there are some changes, we can summarize those and present them to you, and if need be, amending the document formally by the council, we can do that as well. But we would like to start the 90-day review.
Yeah, I trust that you have a vested interest in no inconsistencies from the general plan and the housing element.
That's correct.
Well, with that, is there an action to be taken?
I move for adoption of resolution number 2812-09 as stated.
Second.
And I'll just clarify that we're adding the stipulation that staff may make ministerial non-substantive corrections as necessary. Motion has been seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None? Thank you very much for the presentation and for staff's work. Item 12, a public hearing, master development plan amendment. Gerard Wine Tasting Room, 6795 Washington Street, Building E. The resolution number 2813-09, approving a master development plan amendment to increase the hours of operation. May I hear a staff report, please?
Good evening. This item is a request from Gerard Tasting Room to increase their hours of service, and that's to extend them for 2 hours at the end of the day. Their on-site uses are approved under a master development plan and a use permit, and those include permits for wine tasting, and that's indoors in the main tasting room that's open to the general public. That is indoors in a private tasting room by special appointment, and on the outdoor deck in an informal self-service manner where guests purchase wine tastings indoors and take wine out onto the patio. There is no formal service by employees that's permitted under those permits. And staff notes the challenges that are inherent in the outdoor aspect of the wine tasting, in that it's absent the traditional educational component that accompanies wine tasting, and that occurs when you sit at the bar and you're next to the person who's pouring the wine, and that it also involves 1 ounce pours that are refilled indoors, necessitating the guests to go in and outdoors while they taste the different pours. And the hours of that use are from 10 a.m. until 6 p.m. They're seeking to increase that until 8 p.m., and that's both indoors and outdoors. Special events are another component of the use, and those are defined as gatherings of people greater than 31 persons. They're allowed indoors until 10 p.m. and outdoors until 6. The applicant seeking to increase that until 8 p.m. to be consistent with the tasting use. The last aspect of the use is the retail sale of wine for consumption off-site and wine-related merchandise, and these are considered primary retail uses. And those hours are from 10 a.m. until 6 p.m. The impacts from the extended hours of operation are expected to be minimal. There are very few homes nearby, and there are uses and buildings that are between the use and those uses. The hours are similar to other uses in the area, and Masonry is an example, and the existing parking lot is sufficient to meet the parking demand. The greatest potential impact from the expanded hours would be from the outdoor use, although these are expected to be minimal as well. The applicants indicated that it intends to continue operating business as it currently conducts it, and that's accommodating drop-in guests as well as making appointments for special tastings. It does not plan on advertising or organizing wine club or other gatherings beyond the 2 special events that are permitted under their entitlement each month. And that approved use does not permit the sale of glasses or bottles of wine for consumption on site. Staff notes, as it did earlier, that the approved use allows guests to purchase wine tastings indoors and to take that out on the deck, but that wine service is not permitted by employees. The business has evolved, and the employees try to facilitate the guest experience by collecting empty glasses on the patio, taking those indoors, filling them, and taking them back outside. And while there isn't formal pouring of wine on the patio, staff does consider this service. So we've included a condition making it clear that service by employees is not permitted. Staff wants to note that after the staff report was published, it received a call from Verissimo, and they are interested in now extending their hours of service until 8, and I think that we can expect to see other wine tasting rooms ask for the same extension. They all like to be equal, it seems. Lastly, I want to comment on the town's retail diversity policy, and that's a newly enacted policy that was adopted in May of this year. And it applies when the council determines that a primary use is overrepresented, and in that case, a certain amount of floor area must be devoted to a secondary retail use. It didn't apply to this wine tasting establishment when it was in place, but the applicant's request to increase the hours of operation provides an opportunity for council to consider application in this case and to bring the use more in compliance with the retail diversity policy. We are recommending approval with the conditions that are proposed in the staff report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions of staff? Councilmember Moeller?
Did you have an opportunity to discuss the 25% retail use policy with the applicant?
I haven't. No, he's out of town, and I haven't raised that with them.
But it seems like from what you said about the floor space, they do have additional floor space in there. Okay, thanks.
Any other questions, Councilmember Moeller? That's it for now?
No, that's it for now. Thanks.
Councilmember Chilton?
I think my question has to do with the resolution, how it relates to you talking about the wine service, because the conditions of approval is 3 is wine tasting service by employees shall not be conducted on the deck. And you talked about a little bit of the gray area on the definition of what is wine tasting service by employees. I don't know if the council believes this is necessary, which I question, but I think it may need to be expanded a little bit, that includes taking a glass of wine to somebody. I mean, obviously, they're going to go out there and get empty glasses. So that's not wine tasting, but it's related to it. I don't know. I think we should discuss that whole issue when we get to it. But I think it would be worthwhile to, do you think it would be worthwhile to further define that? Okay.
Your question is the definition of wine service? Okay. Noted. We will bring that back up with staff. Councilmember Dutton, any questions of staff?
No, I don't.
Then I just have, I think, one, maybe two. As presented, the applicant is requesting these hours to be changed year-round, correct? They did not
Yes,
request seasonal hours necessarily.
that's correct.
Okay.
But the intent is really to use the daylight savings hours in warm weather months. While the request is year-round, staff thinks it will be self-regulating, that when it's dark and cold, there'll probably not be a use of the deck.
I think to the point that you brought up, that we may potentially be seeing other businesses that don't have matching hours, we may need to define extended seasonal hours so that isn't a question from one business to another. If someone thinks it's too cold, too dark, too anything, but somebody else thinks their service can continue, we may want to define that. So that's something for, I think, consideration.
When we've applied seasonal hours in the past, we've generally allowed it between April and October.
Okay. Then you're also advocating a 6-month review
Yes.
of this. And the question, the only other question I had, you mentioned education, not just pouring. Is it your position that even education about the wine is considered service? Or are you talking about just the actual
No, I was
pouring
trying to just explain the normal attributes of wine tasting, and the outdoor wine tasting veers from that somewhat, and that you don't have those same attributes. Not that it's necessary or service, but that's part of staff's understanding of how informal that outdoor use was.
Okay, I think to Councilmember Chilton's point, we'll try to define service in a minute, I think. No other questions of staff right now? Then if we have the applicant to come and speak to your request, please state your name and.
Erin Luby, I'm the tasting room manager at Gerard. So we're essentially just looking to extend what we currently do from 10 to 6 to 8 o'clock. So tastings in the bar, private tastings, and then again, very informal tastings outside. What we've been doing so far is we pour the wine inside, the guest then goes outside. We kind of discuss the wine with them before they go outside, and then they go out and enjoy the weather and taste their wine, and then they come back in when they're ready for their next pour.
Okay, and to the question, if I may start, seasonal, as stated by council or staff, the months again, I'm sorry, Sandra,
April to October.
if it's the council direction, do you have a comment as to whether that would be appropriate, inappropriate?
Yeah, our intent is only to do this through daylight savings.
Okay, thank you. So, Councilmember Mueller, do you have any questions of the applicant? Councilmember Chilton.
Well, staff has stated, I don't know if this is by observation, this concept of service of somebody comes in, they get their first glass, one of your staff goes out and says, hey, I see you're done with your Chardonnay, do you want some Pinot? Is that something you do, you want to do? I mean, it seems reasonable to me, but I don't know if that's, it's harder right now to say yes or no on that, but is that something that is common and you think is important? Or if the council said, you know what, you need to make sure that your wine tasting bar folks said, come back in for your next glass of wine. I just recall being in a Santa Barbara wine rig and they had signs all over the place. You can't do this, you can't do that, you have to do this, and it was ridiculous. So there's got to be some realism there. So I was curious on your perspective on that.
Sure. Ideally, it would be great to be able to take the next wine out to them, but we also understand that there are restrictions and things that we can and can't do. Our staff members are out there interacting with them and having a conversation, so it's not like we pour the wine inside and then abandon them outside and they're left on their own. So they're definitely still getting that interaction.
That's my only question.
Councilmember Dutton.
No, I don't. No questions.
I don't think I have any questions for you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any members of the public like to comment on this issue this evening? No. You have seatbelts on out there tonight? All right. Return to council for discussion. Councilmember Moeller, comments?
In general, I like to see the town. I think it closes up too quick. I'm very interested in having some later hours. I think, I really like, you can go buy a fur coat at Overland Sheet Company, at midnight. I'd like to see a lot more activity kind of going on at night. And in terms of that, I also really like our 25% retail diversity new proposal that we have. So my opinion right now, and Sandra brought it up, I think that would be a great idea. I'd be very supportive of these additional hours and very supportive that we include a 25% retail diversity with this. And as Sandra also pointed out, I think there's going to be a lot more of the wineries coming, and it's a great opportunity to increase it. I went to Cornerstone Page just last weekend. They said that their chocolate display is wildly successful. I bought a whole bag of stuff and brought it home too. So they're really happy about it and talking about some other stuff. So I think that's, so far working really well. So that's my opinion. I would be willing to support these hours and add retail diversity.
So if I may just ask for clarification from staff, the applicant was in business prior to our adoption of the diversity standards.
Yes.
So, and they're not necessarily advocating that that be added to this application. This is purely about the hours of operation.
It is.
So
That retail diversity policy, though, applies whenever the council determines that there's an over-concentration of these uses, has different clauses to that, one of which is specifically no new standalone wine tasting rooms are allowed, but there are several considerations and requirements as part of that.
So you're saying that is there a trigger like changing hours that would then require an existing business to then?
Not automatically. It would be upon a determination by council, but the discretionary nature of this permit allows you to consider that.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Chilton.
Well, I'm going to go back to a couple of issues, and we've talked about the council's never either come to resolution or taken action. I personally believe that the council should have adopted a town-wide policy on tasting room hours because it feels arbitrary every time somebody comes and one person's 7 and one is 6 and one is 10. I think we erred when we made one 10. And so I think that it should remain 6 in general. But my problem is that I don't see any reason that all these other tasting rooms have been given those hours, and why should Girard not, if the council's not willing to put forth a consistent policy? So, and I think the 6-month review is important. I'm okay with that. 8 p.m. is not my preference. I don't really care about the seasonal hours part of it because I think they will do that from a business perspective anyway. They're not going to be open until 8 o'clock in February when it's raining. It just wouldn't make sense. I don't want to be too nitpicky. I think that it's reasonable in a town like this that we should encourage good service, and I think that item 3 should be defined. The wine tasting service should be defined as pouring of wine. To go out there and talk to somebody and say, "Did you enjoy your Chardonnay?" and it came from Yountville Appellation or wherever it came from, and our next glass is Pinot, but you have to get up from your table and come in for a support because the town doesn't allow us to bring you a glass. That doesn't seem reasonable to me. So I would define wine tasting service as the pouring of wine on the patio. And then lastly, I do not think that the retail policy should apply here. I think the goal was not to expand the number of standalone tasting rooms. This business was not predicated their business plan at all, nor did they build their facility in any way to have 25% of the square footage as other retail, and that would be a significant cost to them to do that. So I don't think that should be triggered. So my only change to the resolution is I believe that number 3, the council should consider changing wine tasting service to be defined as the pouring of wine. That's my only comments.
Thank you. Councilmember Dutton.
Thank you. Yeah, I have no problems with the hours. I do agree with Councilman Chilton as far as, we are all over the board with these, although they do seem to take care of themselves. And as Sandra mentioned, we'll probably have another one come in, want to extend their hours. So probably down the road, we should put some maximum times on there, but this certainly isn't the place for now. Unfortunately, as one who doesn't participate in the wine situation, I really have no idea how the pouring goes on inside or outside. So if it's done in other places that have outside, are we allowing it in other wine tasting rooms to pour outside?
Well, I guess the main issue there is whether it's a service area and included in the FAR calculation, which in some cases we count it if it's service, but if it's really informal, that's where the informal nature comes to bear on what they're doing.
Well, it seemed with all our FAR problems, they'd certainly want it as an informal situation.
Exactly.
So I have no problem with that. I don't, maybe the customer needs a little exercise to go inside anyway. And as far as the business feature, I agree with Councilmember Chilton. They went into this business not, with that in mind. And I assume if it becomes successful in others, they may come in with a business opportunity to be associated with that also.
Thank you. I will state that I agree with more clearly defining wine tasting service to be wine pouring. I support the hours being extended on a seasonal basis and that we define those to the months staff has recommended. I would also support no outdoor service beyond education and certainly customer service, but not wine pouring service. Specifically, I recall there was a fairly extensive discussion about the public access to that patio and that there is a space that is always available to the public. They're not required, though it's obvious it looks like a tasting facility, but part of the council's willingness to extend the patio and not calculate that space into the FAR service area was that it be public open space and accessible. So I would not be in favor at all of allowing you to pour outside, but certainly interacting with your guests is totally appropriate. And I don't think that it's appropriate at all to try to retroactively impose our recent retail diversity. If it is good business, and we are seeing that it, at least in one instance, it's been very good business plan, that's up to you as the applicant or you as the business owner. But I don't think it's appropriate at all for us to try to retroactively require that you change your whole business footprint and business model. And I also remember when we specifically invited in other members of the industry, they stated there was no need to uniformly set either seasonal times necessarily, but also hours of operation. Conditions are different. You're in a business area where there really isn't any residential impact. You have plenty of parking, especially in the evening, where other wine tasting facilities in town, that isn't the condition. And so we are being a little more stringent about the hours of operation in those other areas. So I think that's the reason for the diversity of the circumstances, not that we're being inconsistent necessarily. So, but I do specifically remember industry representatives saying, we'll work it out. We don't have to match, somebody next door or down the street on the other side of town. Now, that may be evolving into, well, if they're open later and they're having business, we may want to try it, but that doesn't guarantee that they're going to be as successful. So anyway, with those general comments, and I do support the 6-month review that's proposed by staff just to make sure that there aren't any unforeseen negative impacts on the neighborhood. Councilman Chilton?
Can I ask for clarification of your position, because it wasn't clear to me, and maybe Councilmember Dutton as well. The item 3, wine tasting service, you specifically said wine tasting service is defined as pouring. Does that mean you are okay with the concept of somebody goes out, they talk about it, they take a glass back, and they pour it inside and bring it back to them?
No, I consider delivery or pouring of wine as wine service.
Is that what you meant as well?
Exactly.
Okay.
So is that, with staff, is that clear enough, that our definition of basically no wine service, whether it be poured out on the patio or delivered to the guest, would be allowed? With that clarification, is there a motion to be had?
Well, I'm okay with your seasonal hours. I don't know what the rest of that's not in the resolution, so I don't know if that.
True. If you'd like, I'd like to get your opinion, Councilmember Moeller, on whether you believe setting seasonal hours is appropriate or not.
I don't know what, do we define by a certain date? I mean, what is a season?
April through October.
April 1st through October 31st? So the applicant, I think you said that that's your intent anyway, right? I'm fine with seasonal hours.
Councilmember Dutton, is that addition satisfactory?
I think we ought to just address what the applicant wanted. They just want to extend it till 8 o'clock. I think if we try to get into the other things, that's something for, I think, another discussion. If we want to make standard, you can't stay open any later than this, you can't open any earlier than this. I think that's something to discuss for another time.
Okay. Well, I do feel it's appropriate to set the seasonal schedule. If we can clarify, Councilmember Chilton, do you feel it's necessary or
I don't feel
inappropriate?
I agree with Councilmember Dutton. I don't feel it's necessary. I'm not, greatly opposed to it, but I don't think it's necessary to get down to that.
And likewise, I mean, I'm fine with it, but I'm also can vote on.
Fine without it.
Fine without it, absolutely.
Well, with that consideration, is there a motion to be presented by council?
I'd like to move to adopt resolution number 2813-09, approving a master development plan amendment to increase the hours of operation for the Girard Tasting Room located at 6795 Washington Street, Building E.
If I may, with the amendment to define wine tasting service as the pouring or delivery of wine outside to be prohibited.
As mentioned by Vice Mayor Dunbar.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? That application passes. Thank you. Item 13, staff informational reports. Community Center Library Project Status Report. Welcome.
Thank you, Vice Mayor, council members. In Steve Rogers' absence, he asked that I be sure to be here in case you had any questions on these staff reports. I'll just give you a quick run through on the community center. There is nice momentum going. I'm sure you guys frequent that block, and so you see the roof going on, you see concrete being poured every day, you see the siding going on. Soon as next week, we'll have solar panels starting to be installed on the roof. Inside the building, all the walls have sheetrock on them, and other finishes are beginning to go in. The biggest concern in this staff report is the PSO that we've all expected for quite a while. In fact, the sheriff, when he was here leaving earlier, wanted to know all about it. The reality is there was a lot of poor work put in place in that PSO. So we're having the contractors take out everything that's wrong and put it in. Some of it had to do with suppliers. Countertop brackets were manufactured not at 90-degree angles. Unfortunately, the contractor installed them. So there's an issue. The lockers were delivered damaged, had to be reordered. That's an issue. We had lighting manufacturers deliver materials with wrong mounting brackets, having to get those in. Some of the trim work was done poorly. Anyways, we're excited to get the sheriffs moved in there, but we want it to be the right quality that the town paid for. Back on the budget pages, there's no real surprises in here from what we went over last time. And this has all been gone over with the subcommittee. So at this point, I'd really just open it up for questions.
Councilmember Mueller? Councilmember Dutton?
I just had a question. You mentioned the contracts on the PSO. Are they just doing that office, or are they doing other work in the community hall?
It's a mixed bag. Some of the materials that were supplied were specific to the PSO. Some of the finish work, that we do have those contractors working multiple places, but there's been staff changes. Some of the concrete work that we had to deal with on the floors, there's been staff changes with those contractors on the other side. So there is overlap, but I would say the spotlights are out and the hounds are on their trail.
Okay. I just had one question, and obviously, I assume this is the wall in the back by the parking lot that had...
The CMU wall, yes.
Was there concern they didn't like what they were seeing, or they just didn't feel it was high enough?
Well, there was an original design height, and when the wall was installed to that height, it actually ended up below the neighbors, the top of the neighbor's fence, and many of the neighbors are going to take their fences out to extend to that wall. That with the realization that when you're standing at the community center, you're elevated, and so it just gives you a little bit more view. There were some concerns of privacy. So we found a way to add a Corsa block, and actually that is well underway.
Good.
Councilmember Chilton. Just a question of, I think town manager was approximating 75% completion. Would you agree with that? And generally speaking, even with the delays in the PSO, how would you rate us on the
In the
master schedule?
PSO, the job site superintendent in this morning's meeting said he's doing everything he can to get that building punched out in the next 2 weeks.
We've heard that before.
And when all the material is on site to replace the material that was delivered damaged or manufactured wrong, then I could have a little more faith in that. But until I see a new set of lockers there, until I see the new countertop brackets sitting there, I'll continue to question that date.
But in terms of the overall schedule, that's not impacting, and maybe this is a little bit to Councilmember Dutton's concern, the delays of the PSO aren't really impacting the overall schedule of the site.
No, I would say, in fact, the critical path of the project, which is the community center, has a tendency to draw people, workers, away from the PSO, which really contractually doesn't have to be delivered till mid-October. They're just trying to get it finished. And then, as far as the rest of the project goes, they haven't provided a schedule that shows they've deviated from the last one they prepared. We're always suspicious of that. We've demanded a new schedule to be delivered by this Friday to essentially have them justify what they're telling us. We're eternal skeptics, so.
Right. I share that skepticism. Yes. Councilmember
Just
Dutton.
to clarify, my concern wasn't with the time frame. It was more with the individuals who were doing this
Yeah,
work.
you were expecting the same quality that happened in the PSO to happen elsewhere.
Bingo.
Right.
Thank you.
And that's not happening.
No.
That was the job changes that you've alluded to, I think.
Yes.
Partly. No other questions? Thank you very much. Now, part two, wastewater treatment plant upgrade status report.
This one is really simple. The project hasn't started yet. We have Aztec Consultants under contract. We've had a pre-construction meeting with them. Everything we're seeing from them thus far seems positive. They came very organized to the pre-construction meeting. Actually, so organized they actually brought a progress billing with them. So they're ready to get going starting this coming Monday. And I do have one question of council on this. We have the subcommittee for the community center. Does the council want to initiate that same sort of update procedure going forward on this project?
A good question. Now, how does council feel about that? No, it's our time.
It's your time.
Councilmember Mullard, did you have an opinion on that?
If it doesn't cost me anything, I have no opinion.
Only time, potentially. Councilmember Chilton.
I think the total amount for this project is at 1.2 million. Am I remembering correctly? It's going to last how long?
It'll be in carryover into next year, just barely.
I think one of this scale that we can look at our new public works director often and get updates from him as well as town management.
It's certainly a simpler project than the town center.
I have to say that I think if you guys weren't on it, then I think it would warrant some more oversight. But I think because of its size and unless something comes up, I it's only demonstrated in the past that you're going to bring issues forward. So go for it.
Councilmember Dutton, you have an opinion on that?
No, unless you wanted to appoint a citizen ad hoc committee of one. I'm sure ex-councilman Rosa would enjoy something to that. Other than that, no.
He'll probably be standing outside the door at your meetings anyway.
Okay.
What I would say is I think it's a good point to bring up, but that I agree with Councilmember Chilton that we'll leave it in the very capable hands of our new Public Works Director, and if somewhere down the line we feel that we need to change that direction, then we can.
Very good.
Can I follow up on that?
Yes,
I
please.
think that the type of reporting you've done, and you don't have to go to quite this level of detail, but kind of an understanding of where we are with the budget, et cetera. I think it would have been easy probably to, with the pool, we might have wished in hindsight we had a subcommittee, so maybe there was. Was there a subcommittee for the pool? No, I don't think so. So I think if things change, this kind of reporting is very, very useful.
Okay. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Item C, informational report on fee increases for before and after-school youth programs and camps. The new voice you'll be hearing, John DiLorenzo.
Good evening, Mr. Vice Mayor, members of council. I'd like to give you this evening a brief update on fee increases for our youth before and after school programs and camps that went into effect this month. Now, there's two reasons for these increases. First, the Napa Valley Unified School District has imposed rental charges on our use of Yountville Elementary School. We estimate these charges to be just over $36,000 for the next year. This, of course, is an unbudgeted cost, and the fee increases are necessary to cover that cost. Second, the increases are necessary to achieve the cost recovery targets adopted by the Council in the fiscal year 2009-10 budget. So to cover the school district charges and achieve the town's cost recovery targets, most fees in these programs are increasing by $3 to $5 per day. But I want to stress, even with the increases, our fees are still below market rates charged by our primary competitor, the Napa Valley Unified School District, and we are still a great value. The increases will allow us to reduce the town's subsidy to these programs by approximately 50%. It should be noted that 63% of the total participants are non-residents. Philosophically, we feel the town should not be subsidizing non-residents. A future goal the council may want to consider is eliminating the town's subsidy completely for these programs. Now, we informed the parents of these fee increases in a letter that we sent out last week, a copy of which is included in your packet this evening. And in that letter, we reminded the parents of the town's youth program subsidy funds, which are available to help qualifying families pay these fees. Carol Rasmussen, our staff member who's in charge of these programs, will be at the back-to-school night to answer questions parents may have. And we made it very clear in the letter that both Carol and myself are available to assist parents and to answer any questions they might have. That concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Moeller, any questions?
Yes, I do. I wholeheartedly agree that the town should not be subsidizing non-residents. Based on that, when you raised your current fee to the new daily fee, you did not take that into consideration, did you?
What this does, the fee increases in total will reduce the town's subsidy to this program, which in effect is reducing subsidy to non-residents. But if you're asking if we differentiated between non-residents and residents in the fees, we have not. If that's a direction council would like us to go in, we can go in that direction for future fees.
And is that your recommendation by your statement that the town should not be subsidizing non-residents?
Right. What these fee increases do, in addition to covering the school district rental charges and making sure we achieve the council-adopted cost recovery targets, it reduces the town's subsidy for these programs from just over $26,000 a year to just over $13,000 a year. Now, with some additional increases that wouldn't have to be very high in the future, you could totally eliminate this subsidy, and that is not unusual by industry standards to have programs such as these covering their full costs.
So I don't want to put you on the spot numerically here, but you think that would totally close the gap if those fees were then further raised for non-residents based on the high percentage of non-residents? Wasn't it like 60-some percent?
63%. Yes, and I don't have the exact computation. We could come back to you with that if you wanted to raise the non-resident fees to cover the subsidy totally.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Councilmember Chilton? Do you want some more time with the calculator?
Sure.
Councilmember Dutton?
Just a question, John. When you say non-residents, do you mean these are residents outside the town limits or the school district limits?
Outside of the town limits.
So somebody that might live just a block out is considered. Okay. Do you have much information on the non-residents? Are these primarily people who work in town that bring the children in, or do you think it's children that they're just bringing up here from other areas because of, so it's cheaper, I guess, so.
Yeah, it's a good deal. I don't have those details, but I'd be happy to get those for you from my staff.
It would be interesting to see that, because obviously many of the people that work here honestly can't afford to live here, and that's a shame, but, and it does offer, probably in a lot of cases, a very nice situation where they can leave the children or pick them up later. But in any event, from there, I do agree that I would hate to say no, non-residents, not knowing the full situation on all of them. I'm sure there's some be adequate, but I'd like to know a little more on that if we could. But I do appreciate the goal of closing that gap, though, certainly.
Okay.
And my only comment would be that I agree that it's appropriate to reduce and eventually eliminate the subsidy to non-residents. In that process, we may need to more clearly define our definitions of resident and non-resident. I think Councilmember Dutton was alluding to that whether we incorporate certain actual mile radius from town versus literal resident or something of that nature, I think it might be something that you and staff can evaluate on an ongoing basis. Any other comments?
Vice Mayor, I might add, because I do think in finding that, I know when I was involved with doing some of the following kids with the baseball program and what have you, had we not let non-residents be involved, we would not have had a program. I mean, a lot of these people, although they don't live right in the town, live adjacent to it and do provide some very fine services within the town. So I'd really be, I don't say we shouldn't do it, I'd just be a little cautious on how we approach it, rather than just cutting a knife at the town limits, because there's a lot in the fringe areas, people that do contribute an awful lot to the town. And I think consider themselves as part of Yountville.
Mm-hmm.
Councilmember Chilton.
Well, just to follow up on Councilmember Dutton's comments, my belief is we actually should not differentiate on town residents versus non-town residents. I think we should differentiate. I don't know if this is possible, or I actually don't know. You may not know how many people are all of the participants Yountville Elementary students, or
Yes.
are there? Okay, they are. Okay, I think it's important for the school district to understand that the town of Yountville considers the school to be a very important piece of the character of Yountville, which I believe it is, and especially in tough budgetary times, that the town has showed a commitment to not differentiate between us and them, but we support having an elementary school in this town, which we would not have if it was only Yountville residents. So I think from that perspective, I say if you're a student of Yountville Elementary, you're treated like every other student at Yountville Elementary, and we should look at it that way. I do regret, I had thought, and I don't know when we started this, we had talked about a sort of a 5-year plan to close the gap on the subsidies, that the council sort of had a standing policy of getting this to non-subsidization, which I think is reasonable. I feel like this year, especially if you're looking at after school, I mean, you're talking about 50% increase and the 42% increase. It's fairly substantial, and it feels like the wrong time to be doing that. Not that the town doesn't also have financial pressures as well. Obviously, it's already gone out, but I assume we do have, for people who are in the financial standing of people at the school is very different. It's a very diverse school, that we do have that youth subsidy fund out there, and that continues. And maybe at some point, that's the ironic part, is we don't subsidize it, but then we subsidize it through a different fund in some way, possibly. So I think we have to be very cognizant of the fact that even these seemingly small changes percentage-wise can be big, and especially in times like these.
Thank you. Thank you for the report.
You're welcome.
Moving on to item 14, council member reports and comments. Flood Control and Water Conservation District, there was no attendance at that meeting today. Napa County Transportation and Planning Agency, I know there is a special meeting tomorrow. Councilmember Chilton?
Tomorrow, 8:30 a.m. At the NTTPA offices on 3rd Street, there is a special meeting to address the second protest that we've had and the awarding of the bus service in Napa County. This is now the other bidder, MV Transportation. So I believe that's shown on Napa TV on Channel 28. So it could be exciting yet again. So that's the big thing that's out there. And then there's another meeting that's coming up in mid-August, which we won't report on until the September meeting.
Thank you. Napa River Watershed Information Center, Councilmember Moeller.
That meeting will be held August 23rd, I believe.
So
Coming up.
A
not
report next meeting in September then.
now. Right.
One thing, another report, I'll mention, the North Bay Division of the League of California Cities met, and some of the council and staff was in attendance for that. The one highlight that I certainly recall, first of all, there was a roundtable discussion, or a panel discussion on water supply and conservation issues, not only in the North Bay, but basically statewide. But the other agenda item I remember specifically was being elected the second vice president of the division. I think it was one of those cases where I didn't step backwards as fast as the others, but I will happily serve and help represent Yountville with the North Bay League. So other reports and comments. Councilmember Moeller, do you have any other? Councilmember Chilton.
Napa County LAFCO met yesterday. The only two actions that were taken were to expand the Napa Sanitation District to include that new expansion at the Queen of the Valley Hospital that you may have read about in the paper. One thing that LAFCO has some it's kind of cleanup to do is there are these pockets of service areas within larger service areas, and strangely the parking lots at the Queen of the Valley Hospital do not have authorization to be part of the sanitation district. So to get water and sewer service, they have to be rolled into that. So that was one of those little peculiarities that happened yesterday. And everything else was even more uninteresting than that.
Councilmember Dutton?
I have nothing.
Thank you. Item 15, future agenda items. Yountville Days Parade and Festival, special event permit application fees. Item 16, we do not, am I reading this correctly? We do not have a closed session following this meeting?
Nope.
I'll gladly move on to item 17.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. Thank you. Good night.